Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know it has been a while since I put a video up. It's not because I haven't been doing much photography. I've actually been kind of busy. I've just been doing more work in my studio, which is behind me actually. Product photography. I've been doing headshots, portraits. I just finished up a pretty big food and wine project for a client. A lot of it done in my studio, and I'm still learning that, so I didn't want to vlog that. I'm getting good at it though, so I think I'm going to start vlogging some studio work. In fact, here's just a couple of photos that I've taken in my studio over the past several months. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot, something kind of different for me. I did, however, have a bunch of photos that people had sent me for critiques that I haven't gotten to yet. So I wanted to take the time just before Thanksgiving to get through those. So I'm going to do that now. Keep in mind, these are all my opinion, right? I'm going to give you my view, both good and bad, maybe suggestions how I would make it better, but know that it's just my opinion, and this is art. So kind of by definition, there's going to be a lot of different opinions on any piece of art. With that said, let's jump onto my computer and we can start taking a look at some of these photos. Okay, here I am on my computer. We've got a lot of photos to get through, so I'm going to try to go relatively quickly. These were all sent in from viewers really all around the world. And I'll give you my quick comments, again, both good and bad. So this one, overall, I like. I like the symmetry of it. I'm always into symmetry and simplicity, and you sort of have that here. I also like the fact that the angle of the light is coming kind of from the left, from the side, and that gives you that texture on the front of the building. If this light was coming straight on the building, you would not have that texture, and it wouldn't be as good. To me, there's a couple things that I would do probably to improve it. I find it lacks a little bit of drama. I would want a little bit of contrast. In fact, if you just, let's do a tone curve really quickly, and we'll pull up on the right, pull down on the left to create that contrast. You know, again, you're getting a bit more drama. The driveway in front doesn't need to be as prominent. I would probably darken that. So if I used a linear gradient tool, I'm in Lightroom, pull up, darken it a little bit. Again, that now makes your eye draw towards the building. Ideally, I would darken the sky as well. Lightroom doesn't do a great job of selecting skies, but just to give you a sense, if I tried to select sky and then pulled it back a little bit, again, it's not very good, but that's kind of more what I would be going for, a bit more dramatic. So here's the original. That's closer to what I would be looking for, but overall, really cool shot. Oh, lastly, the trees in the foreground, to me, are distracting. Those are not easy to get rid of, although it's getting easier with Photoshop, but that I would try to. Let's go to the next one. Same photographer, nice coastal shot. Again, I like the black and white processing here. It's done really well. You got some nice whites, none blown out. You have some darks, not fully black, which is good. I'm assuming this is somewhere on the east coast of the US, but I don't know. Ideally, I'd have more grass in the front, like the mud in the center foreground to me doesn't do much for it. Maybe I would add a little bit of contrast. You can pull up the whites a little bit more. But overall, really nice scene. And if you've been in areas like this is going to seem really familiar to you. I just want one of those houses. This does not look like the east coast of the U.S. Somewhere, I mean, it reminds me of Texas, but somewhere out west. And I like this because of the texture, right? The texture in the wood, the texture of those skulls. I like the dark sky too, because now my eye is really drawn to the barn or the structure, whatever it is. I guess I'd like to see a little bit more of the structure, but overall really cool and nicely seen by the photographer. I'm not sure where this is. It's a long-ish exposure. It's 1/15 of a second, which I'm assuming the photographer did because it was probably dark. They're at f5.0. To me, the subject matter is not terribly interesting. Maybe if you used a super long exposure, smoothed out that water a little bit, that would be good. The tree on the right, because it's 1/15 of a second, it must have been a breezy day, is just blurry to me. In fact, the whole thing looks a little blurry, but it just could be a small file. I would clone out the tree, maybe would have used a longer exposure here. Somewhere tropical, maybe Hawaii, I'm guessing, because I see those kind of lava rocks in the foreground. Very cool shot. Ideally, I love the curvature of the tree, and obviously they're getting this in silhouette with the sun behind it. The land mass on the mid-right, to me, is distracting. I try to clone that out. With a curve like this, ideally, you would see the curve more prominently. In other words, shooting it more from the side. You could see there's a curve to it, but from the side, you would see the curve even more noticeably. Post-processing, little overdone. I'm seeing some shadows, or some glow, I should say, around the tree. And lastly, on the far upper right, there's another tree encroaching on the frame. I would clone that out, and ideally I would see more of this tree. Like the top is cut off, I'd love to see all of the fronds as they kind of escalate towards the sky. Very cool shot. I love this building. I don't know where it is. I know it's not New York City because I've shot every cool building in New York. So this is really good. The processing is good. Super long exposure, so you have the cloud movement, which I always try to go for if I can. In fact, I took a shot. Let me minimize this for a second. This is a shot in New York. Similar kind of feel to it. This is on 40th Street and 6th Avenue. I think I like the other building a little bit better, actually. For me, what I might do, this would be a lot of work, is to clone out the other buildings. Like, this is a really cool building in the center. That's the story. The other buildings don't add much. So if somebody wants to, they could clone those out and you get just a more simplistic view of the main story here. But overall, really good. You do have some blown highlights on the upper right. You can kind of pull down the highlights maybe just a tad. If I do that, get a little bit more detail in there, but overall, really cool shot and a great building. So this one, I'm not sure what exactly this is. I don't think this is just a straight photo that's been processed. It feels like some sort of composite. I don't think it's AI, but there's some issues with it, some just weird stuff. If you kind of zoom in, it doesn't look very sharp. If I look at some of these pieces, the selections or whatever was done left with a lot of jagged lines and pixelation. Again, maybe it's just a small image. There's also some, I guess, logical problems. I look at this wall in the back right, or the center right here. It looks like there's an angle, a corner. But if I go up to the top, there's no corner there. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Interesting to look at. I think it could have been executed a little bit better. I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at. This I know, it says in the description, is Boston, but I know Boston pretty well. This is an area called Back Bay of Boston. In the back, that I believe is Cambridge. And if you look at, there's a dome on the kind of upper left. I believe that is MIT. The processing is a little heavy-handed. Like the problem with this one, shooting it, is that there's a big a dynamic range. Like those lights are very bright, the shadows are going to be kind of dark. And so the photographer did their best to even out the exposure, but it looks like it's been processed too much. But I love this concept of different layers. In fact, when I was looking at this one, I was thinking of a couple of other shots, pretty famous shots. Here's a couple. These were shots with just layers. Right? This one, these are very famous photos. These sold for over $3 million, these photos. So I love that concept, and the photographer obviously saw it here as well. The other option here would be just to focus on the foreground, these brownstones. Like, for example, this is going to be an irregular crop, but if you did kind of something like that, I don't know, maybe having the background's pretty cool. But overall, pretty cool shot, and I like what the photographer was going for. So here's a nice reflection. Don't know where this is. I don't love this. It looks like in post the photographer may have warmed it up a bit or put some reds in there, because those leaves in the back, I don't think they've fully turned yet. And the trees themselves are not particularly good looking. If you're somewhere in the fall and getting reflections, you can get something better than this. These trees to me don't look that interesting. And then on the left, you have something going on back here where I think they tried to clone stuff out, but you have these ugly sticks popping up. I mean, just paying attention to all these little details helps. So nice scene, but not a wonderful photograph in my view. Here's a cool architectural shot. Oh, this is not the original. I was playing with it. Sorry, that's the original. Really interesting building. I don't know where this is, but I like the post-processing. It's been darkened, obviously. You're really highlighting the interesting texture and features of the building. The building on the lower left, and that's what I was playing with before, doesn't really add much to me. So I would probably darken it. Again, all I did last time was take a brush, kind of paint over it. And there's better ways of doing it. I'm just in Lightroom now, but just to give you a sense, if you darken that, and now you're focused much more on the main story. Overall, pretty cool building. I might clean up the roof on the lower building as well a little bit. But I like what the photographer saw here and what they were going for. This is a killer shot. This is a spectacular landscape image in my view. So many good things. The tones, the colors, not over-processed. The composition is just cool as hell. You look at that leading line going through and wrapping up into the center of the image. I love the little houses in there. The white trees just dotting the landscape. Just really well done. I feel like I'm looking at a painting, but it's not. It's definitely a photograph. This is a shot I wish I had taken. I wouldn't do a thing to it. This is fantastic in my view. A very cool macro shot. This was done with, it's a macro lens. It's a 105. I have the lens, so I know. A great subject. I love the fact that they added the water. Overall, you kind of look at this and your first reaction is, wow, that's really cool. And I agree, this is a really good shot. And I love the fact that there's no distractions in the background. It's a black background, which makes the eye, really drawn to the flower. The one thing that you deal with when you're shooting with a macro lens is a shallow depth of field. This was shot at f11, but you're so close to the subject that you just can't get around that. In other words, those water droplets in the front are super sharp. God, even that's a really cool image. It's almost abstract. As you go towards the back of the flower, they're blurry. And again, that's just a nature of dealing with a macro lens. What you can do, and what I've done on occasion, is to focus stack. So take one shot with, or several shots, I should say, with different parts of the image in focus, and it's super easy to blend them together in Photoshop. There is an artistic element to having parts of it out of focus, and the photographer may have been going for that. Overall, super image. I love shooting piers. This is a really cool one. I may have been here before. I don't know. It looks a little familiar to me, and it's a really good image. One thing I like about it is the shutter speed. It's 0.8 seconds. But what you get is kind of this really cool feel with the waves. Let me zoom in a little bit and you can see. So they're waves, but there's a softness to them. There's almost a movement to them, which I find really interesting. So overall, I like this. I don't love the people there. They don't really add anything to me. So either you got to come at a time where there's no people, which I typically do. I'm up pretty early. Or you can clone those people out, which I think is relatively easy. That's what I would do. Last point maybe is I would want to see a little bit more around the pier, on the left side and the right side. It's a little tight crop for me. That's just a personal preference. It looks to me, as I'm looking at it, like, yeah, there's some sensor spots, but nothing too bad. Overall, really cool shot and a great spot. I wish I could go here. Well, let me back up a little bit. So I love shooting car taillights and headlights with a long exposure. This is a 4-second exposure. They capture the movement through the image, which I think is always a really cool effect. The other good thing they did, they shot at f/22. So they closed down their aperture quite a bit. That allowed for the longer exposure. The other good thing it did, it gave you those really cool light rays, emanating from the street lights. They look like stars to me, and I love that effect. The problem I have is there's a lot of distractions in this shot. I have a stop sign on the right. I've got a parking sign way in the back. On the upper end of the frame, you have these wires cutting through. You can get rid of those. I would. Lower left in front of the saloon is, I'm not sure what they are, if they're garbage cans, if they're just pieces of metal. I find that those distracting. So it's a cool subject. There's just a lot of mess around it, some of which you can try to deal with in post, some of which you would deal with just composing it differently. So pretty cool image, but again, messy in my mind. Really interesting church. Like the black and white processing, they pulled down the blues in the sky to give you that nice contrast with the clouds and the blue sky. And there's a nice texture here as well, both in the church, in the sky, but also in the foreground, in the cobblestone streets. I think that's really cool. For me, by the way, the other good thing is it's nice and vertical, which is not easy to do. I mean, when you're shooting up at a church with spires, often you get all kinds of weird angles. This one's pretty vertical, which is good. To me, there's not enough separation between the church and the sky. It just kind of gets blended in. Maybe you can deal with that in post. Maybe you come back at a different time where the sun is hitting the church. I would suspect this person didn't have that option. I don't know. But it looks like they went through several rounds of edits in Photoshop. I can see there's like edit, edit, edit with the name of the file. I probably would have selected the building and tried to make it pop a little bit more. It just gets lost in the sky a little bit. Here's another one where the building does get lost in the background, but for some reason I find this one more interesting. I think the sky is better. They didn't over-process it. I think that's an interesting subject, and that great smokestack in it as well. Years ago, this was probably a pretty productive factory. Now it's not. It's just, there's kind of a story there to me. I love the grasses in the front that are popping up and catching a little bit of light. Overall, I like this. I probably would have added a little bit more contrast, but overall, this is a shot I would have stopped and taken and kept on my computer and played with it. This I like. There's a lot of good things in this image. The bridge itself is really interesting, and the way it's composed, I find, again, sort of this leading line going through the image. Those repeating patterns of the arches, to me, are really attractive. And I don't know if the photographer accentuated those in post. I would have, so if they did, good on you. That's a good one. I like the way the water is catching the light. And of course, the light rays are, fantastic. As a photographer, we live for stuff like that. I think the problem was it was, again, a wide dynamic range. Like that light ray on the top was a lot brighter than the bridge. And so it looks like they pulled down highlights from the light ray. It ends up looking a little muddy. There's not a lot you can do about it. The one thing you can do, and I've done, is use a graduated neutral density filter. So I would have put a filter on top of, on my lens, probably tilted it a bit, and which would have darkened the sky, allowed for more balanced exposure. The other thing you could do is take two images, right? You take one with the sky better exposed, one with the bridge exposed, blend them together in Photoshop. All kind of picky. Overall, I think this is a really good image. Another really good image. I think we've got 3 from this photographer. There's a couple later on. I die for fog. I love fog. It adds so much to the mood. And the processing here is really good. The soft colors, not oversaturated in my mind. The composition, this path going through the scene, leading off to this mysterious fog, the bench there. You just want to sit on that bench and you think about all the people that sat there and the stories they would have had. The one thing I would have cloned out is probably the bird feeder on the far right. You can probably zoom in and see it. A little distracting to me. I don't need that, but overall that's super picky. This is a really cool shot. Here's a shot at the beach, almost abstract in nature. We know it's the beach. We know those are waves. This is a 20-second exposure. And so, again, I like the layers and I like the soft tones of the colors here, not over-processed, not over-saturated, which again, I appreciate. A couple of things I would say. To me, the horizon looks a tad crooked. We can just see if I kind of draw a line right across here. If this adjusts at all, no, I guess it's straight. It looked pretty good. It looked crooked to me. Maybe my head is crooked. That's what happened. The one thing I would say is I think it could have used an even longer exposure. At 20 seconds, you do get the abstract nature, but you can make that water even smoother. Let me give you an example. This is a shot I took at a beach in East Hampton. This is almost a 5-minute exposure. And so what you get is a real smooth effect of the water. It looks glassy, which you have to use a super long exposure to get that. At 20 seconds, you're really not going to get that, depending on if it's a wavy, scene, which it looks like it was here. So for me personally, I would have done the super long exposure. I suspect this person did not have an ND filter with them because they went out to f22. They're using a relatively low ISO, and they did 20 seconds. So to go longer, you definitely would have needed a neutral density filter, which they may or may not have had. I always carry one with me. Cool architectural shot, like this building. It's simplistic, right? It's kind of a minimalist shot. I love the curvature of it. I love the way it picks up the light from the sky. There's several details here that we need to pay attention to. To me, this does look a little crooked. So if we go in Lightroom to transform, just hit auto, to me that looks better, right? You get the vertical lines are actually vertical. There's also some distractions. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'm just hitting Command plus to zoom in. One, you have some sensor spots. Those are super easy to get rid of, and you really need to do that because they're distracting. Things like these branches here, I would have gotten rid of that. This little thingamajig here. This tree or bush would have been harder to get rid of. Ideally, you would have, but tougher. But it does look like the photographer tried to get rid of some stuff, because if you look way in the back, you do have what were wires here that the photographer did frankly a bad job of getting rid of, did not get rid of the ones in the reflection. And there's other wires here as well. I think on the other side there's wire. So if you're going to do it, do it. Get rid of those distractions and make sure it's clean, because someone like me is going to zoom in and look at all the details. Here's another architectural shot. This one I like quite a bit. I'm assuming somewhere in the Netherlands just by the writing up there. But just the curvature of the building, of both buildings, is really cool. The reflection of one building in the other is really cool. And the way the light is hitting these buildings. I don't know if this was done in post, but feels kind of natural to me, which means it was a good job in post. I probably would have darkened the bottom a bit just to get rid of the bushes or trees on the lower right. So if you take a linear selection tool and just pull up and just reduce the exposure, right? All of a sudden they become a little less prominent. And then if you want some of the details back, you can always subtract from the mask. I'm going to use a brush, and I'm going to make a small brush. I'm hitting the left bracket key, and you can paint back in some details if you want. Down back here. So you can really, with Lightroom especially these days, you can really get pretty selective in how you play it. So like here's the original. Again, not a really big difference, but I find the foreground a little distracting. You can always darken it to make it less distracting. Again, just a suggestion. Let's go to, let's click here, and let's go to the next one. This is a cool subject. I don't know what it is. Some sort of ovens. So it's titled Vintage Mill. So it must have been an old mill. But there's a lot of good things going on here. The light coming from the side is really cool because it gives you that texture. I like the fact that the photographer left in some details. In the foreground, there's an old baseball cap and a stool on its side. On the upper right, you've got cobwebs. On the far right, looks like there's some old pieces of metal there. On the lower left, there's it looks like barbed wire. All add to it, I think. I would not be removing any of this. Composition's good, subject matter's good, black and white processing is good. See, with black and white, when you want to highlight texture and not get distractions from color, black and white's a great way to go. So I think it was a smart move here. I'll call this a street photography shot. And it's really cool. I'm assuming that the photographer was not the photographer taking these wedding or pre-wedding pictures. I'm assuming they were just walking around, saw this scene, which is a pretty cool scene. I like the bride and groom. The way the light is hitting them is cool. I love the shaft of light coming through. And I like this guy in the far right, sort of standing in the corner watching the scene. The folks in the middle, to me, are kind of distracting. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to play with it for half a second. What if we just to remove the distraction, let's just I'm just going to make this black for now, just to see what it looks like, see if this works. It's not really working, but I would probably go into Photoshop and blacken this all out. Or make it a wall. You can clone one of the other walls around it. Then you would have this guy over here who I would brighten up a bit, and the bride and groom. Again, just me thinking out loud how I might play around with this. So here's a shot taken at a pretty nice time of day with some amazing light rays and back. But at the end of the day, it's just sort of a snapshot, which normally you take with your cell phone. He's not looking at the camera, which I find distracting. I got the big North Face logo. To me, this is just kind of a snapshot, a time to remember. You were up on some big hill in front of a really cool city with some great light rays. But this is not a shot that would stay on my computer because there's just not a lot to it. So the next two are of the same subject. Broadway Tower, I'm assuming, based on the title. Both are cool. Again, as I said before, I love fog. And so here's this mysterious shot of this medieval tower, I guess. I like the fact that we got the person there. It gives you a sense of scale. There's a little thing right next to the person that I would probably just I would clone this out just because I find it a little distracting. It looks like it's a sign of some sort, but that's easy to do. Let me just get back. Overall, really cool shot. That path, by the way, I don't know if they brightened it in post, but it really helps. It's a really nice touch. Again, compositionally, leading line, rule of thirds. I think it's really cool. This is the same, I assume, yeah, Broadway Tower, same subject, totally different shot. No fog at all. So the debate would be, which one do you like better? I think years ago I would have chosen the first. For some reason, this one to me is more interesting. I love the light, that light coming through the trees and hitting the grasses there, hitting parts of the trees. The only thing I would have done is I would have cleaned up some of those branches just above the tower, just to give you a cleaner window to the tower. I normally don't love shooting kind of what I'll call just dead trees. They're pretty ugly. In this case, they're almost abstract, and then you get the cleanliness and straight lines of the tower and back. Could you crop in a little bit? Yeah, maybe. But this is a cool shot. I like this. You know, this is a shot I might not have taken because I don't see the world this way, but I'm glad this photographer did. All right, this is the last one. This, I'm going to have to guess, is Washington, D.C. And that's the Washington Monument and back. I don't know what bridge this is. This must be a fairly long exposure. One, because you got smoothing of the water. And if you look in the way back left, I can zoom in a little bit, I think. You've got some taillights of these cars going over this bridge. So it's a long exposure. And it's tricky because the lights from the buildings and the Washington Monument, probably much brighter than the lights underneath this bridge or whatever light there was. I find it really interesting. I mean, there's probably millions of photos of the Washington Monument, right? And they're all going to be somewhat similar. Many of them will be similar. This is different. This gives you a lot to look at. I don't love the apartment buildings in the middle of the lower frame. I find them distracting. Not much you can do about it, honestly. Maybe you can compose it differently, but overall, really cool shot. So that does it for me. So I guess I'll pick what I thought was the best image here. It was probably this one. Killer shot. Full screen, baby. Thank you so much for watching. I enjoy doing these. I hope you got something out of it. And think of your own photos now in a more critical vein. I'm going to start doing more videos. I apologize for not being all that visible, but I'm going to get back into it, probably do some studio stuff, talk about lighting, maybe some food photography, which I am a semi-master at given my project. And I learned some really cool things that I can share with you. So hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you soon.